All right, so we've looked at some ways to define languages, but the main topic of this section is going to be defining languages using a particular type of grammar. So it's called a phrase structure grammar. Essentially, it's a set of rules that describes how you can construct phrases or sentences out of vocab words in order for the resulting sentence to be valid in the language. So we're going to start with an example straight from the textbook. I've just kind of put this together, and I'll post this Word document on D2L for you to look at yourself. So first of all, we're going to look at sort of a general idea of how this works, and then we'll look at the strict definition. The idea is to start with sort of a placeholder symbol, which is like representing just the sentence as a whole. So that's going to be our S right here. And then gradually replace that with some combinations of other symbols that represent like parts of that sentence. And then let that sort of sequence of replacing certain strings with other strings, let that gradually build up the sentence until we have all the words in place. And so our first example goes like this. The sentence will be constructed of two parts. There'll be a noun phrase and a verb phrase. So the noun phrase and the verb phrase are actually elements of our vocabulary in this situation. We'll get to that soon. And then the noun phrase can be constructed out of an article and a noun, or alternatively, an article followed by an adjective followed by a noun. So the adjective is in parentheses there to indicate that it is optional. And the verb phrase is just going to be a verb, or it'll be a verb and an adverb. So again, the adverb is sort of optional. And then each of these words, like the word article in this construction, can be replaced by any of the following: a or the. And the adjective can be replaced by large or hungry, and so on. We have possible nouns, possible verbs, and possible adverbs here. So by a sequence of steps where we're sort of replacing words or strings of words by other strings of words or individual words, we are going to form sentences. And and these words here that are bold, those words are like they're the elements of the vocabulary that are allowed to be in a final sentence, like a sentence which is actually part of the language. Like if you stop your construction with verb still in it, then you wouldn't be done yet. In order to complete the construction of a sentence, you have to replace that verb with either eats or hops. So it has to be like all bold words by the time you're done. So these are some examples of allowable sentences in the language. The rabbit hops, that would be, we have the article the, we'd have choose the noun rabbit, we'd select not to use the adjective, and then we'd choose the verb hops and select not to use the adverb, right? But we could also select to use the adjective and have a large rabbit hops, or you could have a hungry rabbit hops. So these are all different examples of like sentences that would be in the language. These are elements of the language. There are plenty of examples that are sort of that would like not be in the language, even if they're using elements from the vocabulary. So, for example, the quickly rabbit eats is an example of a string of words that are all in the vocabulary, and they're even the bold words. These are going to be called terminal symbols. But they're not. But this is not something that you could arrive at through the specific rules that have been laid out here. So this is like not in the language, right? Another example is a mathematician. That is a noun phrase, and it's a valid noun phrase by these rules, but it doesn't include the verb phrase. So that also would not be a valid sentence in this language. So that's the general idea of what's called a phrase structure grammar. Let's look at the formal definition now. All right, so a phrase structure grammar is a mathematical object, and it is a four-tuple, meaning that it has basically four distinct parts. So given that it's a grammar, we're going to call it G, and it equals this four-tuple, and the components of the four-tuple are called in general V, T, S, and P, where V is the specified vocabulary that our grammar will use. T is going to be a subset of that vocabulary, which is the set of terminal symbols. So T specifies which symbols are terminal. In our example over here, that would be the set of bold words down here that were allowed to be in the final sentence. And note, by the way, if you take the V minus T, which is kind of like the complement of T in the set, in the vocabulary, that's called N, and that's the set of non-terminal symbols. Occasionally we'll talk about the elements of N, and those would be just non-terminal symbols. Then the next thing here is S. S is a specific element of the vocabulary just designated as the starting symbol, and it's literally just called S almost all the time, right? Like as S for start, I guess. And then the last element of this four-tuple, P, is a set again, and it's a set of what are called productions. And a production is just a rule that replaces one word with another word. And by word, that means like a string over the vocabulary. So it might be noun phrase is replaced by article noun, for example, or the starting symbol S is replaced by noun phrase verb phrase, for example. Those would be productions. And the one rule that it has to satisfy is that the word that gets replaced, like the starting word, has to contain at least one non-terminal symbol. Which means that if you eventually perform a production which results in a string of only terminal symbols, then if you only have terminal symbols, you can't do any more productions, and therefore you stop and you're done. And then that string that you end up with would be called an element of the language. So these productions basically are the rules that we follow to generate sentences. Let's now go back to our document here. I'm going to flip this over. So here is basically the same language, but now defined using the vocabulary and using the formal definition. So we have our G is VTSP, where V equals this set. The vocabulary, the set of symbols that we're going to be using, include the starting symbol as also these things like noun phrase, verb phrase, article, adjective, noun, as well as all these bold elements here, which are the elements in the terminal set of terminal symbols, T. So S is our starting symbol, and then our set of productions is as follows. So a production is always written as a word and then arrow another word. So S produces noun phrase, verb phrase. Noun phrase produces article, noun. And down here, article produces a. Or alternatively, article produces the. The different options for what the article those different options are separate productions. All right. So here's all of our productions, and you can apply these productions in whatever order you want, and as long as you have the correct starting word and replace it with the correct ending word, then yeah, you can use any productions that are available at any time. So here's an example of a sentence construction to produce the sentence, "The rabbit eats." Okay. So this example was with actual English words, but all of the remaining examples I'm going to show you and in the textbook are going to be with letters and numbers. Okay, we're going to focus more on the sort of abstract notion of a phrase structure grammar and a formal language, because that's what we tend to care about more as computer scientists, dealing with strings of numbers and letters. I mean, fundamentally, it's actually all ones and zeros, but we build up from there with different characters. And when you're typing in C++, right, you are defining variables and you're using operators, and you're using quotation marks and then writing strings and all this stuff. Those are all different elements in the vocabulary that C++ is made out of.